They lied repeatedly. They were not targeted for censorship. And I have to say, it's nice to be here to hear a bipartisan support for free speech. Man, I wish a lot of y'all were helping us as the Biden administration was censoring us. We've been in federal court for 2 years trying to vindicate our free speech rights. And I gotta tell you, it's pretty aggravating being an American citizen whose family's been here for hundreds and hundreds of years to see illegal immigrants get faster action in federal district courts than we've gotten. We are still awaiting vindication and relief. And we were not targeted because what we were saying was false. We were targeted because what we were saying was true.
And how much, talk to me about the expense of having to be tied up with trying to get your day in court for that period of time.
You know, it's extensive. Thankfully, we have lawyers who are representing us out of the goodness of their own hearts. But if you look at the effect of censorship over years, Alex made the great point that you cannot compensate someone for the crime of having shut them up by unjustified means for years. That speech that he should have been able to give for years, he can never give. That opportunity is gone. But there's also a real cost in terms of money. I cannot even begin to think about how many millions or tens of millions of dollars we lost out on because our advertisers were targeted, because our readers were targeted, because Facebook and Google and Twitter and YouTube were told to throttle us. It has to be in the millions or tens of millions of dollars. Quite frankly, we're owed restitution.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm sure you'll support my legislation, which would give a private right of action to a citizen to sue an individual government bureaucrat for suppression of speech. I think that turns the tables on the incentive structure that currently exists. Senator Mackey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot today about the Biden administration supposedly censoring of conservatives by talking to social media companies about misinformation. Republicans have wasted an enormous amount of time and resources over the past few years attempting to prove this theory correct, only for it to be repeatedly proven false. The Supreme Court shot down their big lawsuit against the Biden administration in a 6-3 vote. Their big House Judiciary Committee investigation came up empty. And in the chairman's report last week, the supposedly incriminating emails from Biden administration officials pressuring the big tech platforms to censor conservatives, included explicit disclaimers that the officials weren't threatening any action against any platform. Strike one, strike two, strike three, you're out, Republican theory of censorship. Since my Republican colleagues seem confused about what actual government censorship looks like, I thought I could show a few of them to you. It's not just the mafia boss threats from Brendan Carr at the FCC to Disney and ABC. On 6 different occasions, Donald Trump took office and he now has posted on Truth Social explicitly calling for the Federal Communications Commission to revoke broadcast station licenses owned by major networks over their editorial decisions. On February 6th, Trump said CBS should, quote, lose its license over its interview of Vice President Kamala Harris in the fall of 2024. Just over 2 months later, on April 13th, Trump again said CBS should lose its license for its Harris interview. On July 26th, Trump wrote, networks aren't allowed to be political pawns for the Democratic Party. It has become so outrageous that, in my opinion, their licenses could and should be revoked. On August 24th, that was a big day for unconstitutional threats. Twice in under an hour, Trump said that ABC and NBC should lose their licenses. And then, just last Sunday, Trump said the FCC should, quote, look into the license of NBC. Mr. Kimmelman, do you agree that the explicit threats from the President of the United States against broadcasters are far more dangerous than emails from the Biden administration officials identifying online misinformation?
Yes.
Mr. Kimmelman, how many times did President Biden threaten to revoke a broadcast license in our country?
None to my knowledge.
Mr. Kimmelman, how many times did President Biden publicly direct his FCC chairman to look into a broadcaster's license?
None to my knowledge.
Again, 0. This hearing is a farce. We're not focusing upon the imminent threat to the First Amendment, the beating heart of democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of press. That's what this hearing should be about. What's going on at the FCC right now? We are relitigating an issue that the Supreme Court has already decided, that in fact, independent analysts have debunked, even as President Trump and Federal Communications Chairman Brendan Carr and other Trump officials wage a war on free speech that this country has not seen since the McCarthy era in the 1950s. Like during that Red Scare, if you're a voice of dissent in this country, you have a target on your back, and they let you know you have a target on your back if you speak up. Law firms, universities, protesters, news media, all have faced this administration's wrath for their political speech. These threats are real, they're scary, and they undermine our democracy. The president is threatening the free speech of the broadcasters in our country every time they dare to run some news story that questions their judgment as an administration. Yet we're wasting time here trying to distract the American people with old emails from the Biden administration while Chairman Carr turns the FCC into the Federal Censorship Commission, threatening free speech, censoring free speech in our country, allowing Donald Trump to continue with his direct attacks on the First Amendment in our country. This is an urgent crisis for our country. Our democracy is at risk when the First Amendment is being challenged so fundamentally by the president out of the White House and instructing his chairman of the Federal Communications Commission to revoke the licenses of anyone who dares run any program that runs contrary to his views. That's what we should be focusing upon right now. That is the threat to our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And to mix sports...
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question to my colleague, just 5 seconds. Did you sign on to that letter asking the FCC to revoke the license of Sinclair Broadcasting in 2018?
I'll have to go and to review that, but from my perspective, what Trump is doing right now at a presidential level, ordering the FCC to act, is absolutely an imminent threat to our democracy.
Okay, and I also, mixing sports metaphors on your strikes, I'm going to throw the red flag because the federal district court, I know something about this, said that the Biden administration had engaged in the worst example of violation of the First Amendment in American history. That decision was upheld by the Fifth Circuit. The Supreme Court did not rule against it. It sent it down. It didn't rule on the merits. It sent it down for a standing issue. So, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd first just like to start by making a very clear statement. Government censorship is wrong, full stop. Never should be tolerated. That should be no matter what side of the aisle that you're on. I think we can agree that the government takes adverse action against speech that it dislikes. That's bad for all Americans, and it's counter to the fundamental values that this country stands for. As ranking member of Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, I have reviewed thousands of pages of documents, including testimony from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency employees, and I'll say that I simply don't agree that CISA, the agency, has worked in a coordinated effort to censor American speech, and the Supreme Court has basically agreed with that finding. However, if there's evidence of wrongdoing on the part of anyone in previous administrations, I want to address it, and I'll work with folks on this panel to do that. Protecting free speech should not be a partisan issue. And that's why I'm disappointed that instead of having the FCC here today to discuss what are urgent and I believe a flagrant violation of America's First Amendment rights, as my colleague just mentioned before me, instead we're rehashing debunked claims regarding activities at CISA from 2018 to 2022. Since it was created in 2018, CISA has protected our nation against cyber criminals and foreign adversaries, who are constantly seeking to breach critical networks and steal America's most sensitive personal information. And unfortunately today, we're hearing claims that have been debunked about the agency's mission and its vital work. The Supreme Court decision in Murphy versus Missouri found with regard to CISA, quote, the evidence does not support the conclusions that the relevant plaintiff made that CISA had violated the First Amendment rights. So it's a Supreme Court decision. None of the documents I've reviewed included instructions for the social media platforms to respond to CISA's questions on flagged content, nor did they attempt to cover up their interaction in some way with these companies. So it's concerning to me that the committee would choose to focus on a backward-looking claim at a time when today, currently, we're seeing unprecedented efforts to wield government power as a tool to suppress free speech and stifle legitimate criticism and legitimate political discourse. In recent months, the Trump administration has revoked media access, gotta say it again, over news coverage that didn't flatter the president. Oh my gosh, horrible. You didn't flatter the president. You can't have media access. That's a high crime and misdemeanor, apparently. He also sued media outlets who publish content that the president doesn't agree with. And he has launched baseless investigations into the president's perceived political enemies. In one instance, the president's FCC chair, Brendan Carr, threatened to revoke the broadcast licenses of ABA affiliates over comments made by a comedian. Oh my gosh, horrible. Comedian comments, revoke that license. President didn't like the comedy. Let's be clear, these acts are unprecedented in American history. And they rightfully raise alarms, I think, for every American. Thousands of Michiganders have reached out to my office saying that we must hold the Trump administration accountable to ensure that these abuses of power are not left unchecked. And I certainly hope that the chairman of this committee and members of the committee will devote their efforts to examining these abuses that I mentioned, regardless of who commits them, because we must all stand up for First Amendment rights in the face of unprecedented overreach. And it's right to call out wherever we see it, no matter who is saying it, no matter what administration. But let's not ignore what we're seeing in front of us right now, constantly, in the media. So, Mr. Kimmelman, a quick question. After threatening regulatory action against ABC affiliates, if it did not suspend Jimmy Kimmel, FCC Chair Brendan Carr said, quote, if you're going to have a license from the FCC, we expect you to broadly serve the public interest, end of quote. So my question for you, sir, is there precedent for the FCC using the public interest, convenience, and necessity standard in the Communications Act to stifle First Amendment protected speech? And how has the FCC historically interpreted the public interest? How is this different?
No, not to my knowledge, Senator. The FCC has used, it's a public interest standard. The FCC has used it very carefully. There's specific direction in the Communications Act beyond the Constitution itself of Congress reminding the FCC not to stifle speech, not to impede First Amendment rights. And the FCC has been very careful in that regard.
So the comments made by the current FCC chair is simply unprecedented in all of your knowledge of past actions.
In my experience, Senator, I've been doing this for more than 45 years. I have never seen anything like that.
That's perhaps why it was so shocking to Americans all over this country, but apparently not to some individuals serving in the U.S. Senate. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, before I begin, one of my colleagues raised a letter that was sent to the FCC back in 2018 that was signed by Democrats. I don't know how many of you know who the chair of the FCC was in 2018? Do any of you know? Does the name Ajit Pai sound familiar? You know who was president in 2018? Donald Trump. I'm sorry if I stumped you all. It was Chairman Pai that denied this thing. And Chairman Pai, in his order, he said something along the lines of, what was submitted to the FCC lacked candor. It's funny to me how there's so many legal ways to call a lie a lie. When the FCC says a submission lacks candor, it means that it intentionally provided false or misleading information omitting crucial facts. Just so that the record's straight. Mr. Volek, just a few weeks ago, the Federal Communication Commission Chairman Brendan Carr made several statements. You've heard a lot of them today, with regulatory action over remarks made by Jimmy Kimmel if they, quote, didn't take action. In his own words, Chairman Carr said, quote, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Now, to be clear, ABC can suspend Jimmy Kimmel's show for whatever reason they want. However, the fact pattern that led ABC to suspend Jimmy Kimmel's show involved a government official, in this case, FCC Chair Carr, making direct threats. As you have written, quote, "But if the government coerced ABC into suspending the show through threats or of retaliation, that would have likely violated the First Amendment." Yes or no, if ABC acted to remove Jimmy Kimmel because of FCC Chairman Carr's threats, would Carr's actions violate the First Amendment?
Yes, I think so.
Unfortunately, the events from a few weeks ago related to Kimmel's show is not the first time that Chairman Carr has weaponized the FCC against broadcasters since he took office. Mr. Kimmelman, I'd like for you to help get some facts on the record. I think you answered these to Chairman Markey, but questions sometimes need to be heard twice. And as the response is, did President Biden ever direct Chair Rosenworcel to investigate a media company, pull their license, and impose the maximum fines and punishment, by the way, that's a quote from Donald Trump, for their unlawful and illegal behavior immediately after threatening to sue that company?
No, Senator.
Did President Biden suggest Chair Rosenworcel should revoke broadcaster licenses for giving him, quote, "bad publicity"?
No, sir.
Did Chairman Carr reinstate complaints against NBC, ABC, and CBS for election coverage that were dismissed by the prior FCC?
Yes, Senator.
Did Chairman Carr launch investigations into local NPR, PBS stations alleging that they could be violating federal law by airing commercials?
Yes, Senator.
Has Chairman Carr openly threatened to remove Comcast broadcast license over news coverage?
Yes, Senator.
Now, look, what's disappointing is that's just a sample of what's recently happened. And I appreciate this hearing. I think this was a good hearing. There are a few of us that actually authored legislation to say, FCC, keep your hands off of these media companies. Protect the First Amendment. Follow the law. I hope that's something that you all will take a look at and see if maybe there's bipartisanship. And if anyone's worried about doing it under this president, let's say the next president. Let's just say, let's take this off the table. So I certainly hope that's something that we can all do together. Now, Mr. Kimmelman, President Trump has developed a habit of suing media companies if they report or publish content he doesn't like. He sued CNN, ABC, CBS, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. I mean, it goes on and on. Trump even sued the Pulitzer Prize winner to the New York Times and Washington Post for their reporting about Russian interference in the 2016 election. Now, some of the media companies, such as ABC and CBS, chose to settle. Others are still fighting. Even if a lawsuit is baseless, what effect does it have on the opposing party, Mr. Kimmelman?
Senator, it has an enormous chilling effect, even as you've heard from my colleagues on this panel here in a different context. It's overwhelming to take on the government. Even if you think you can vindicate your rights, it's a daunting task, and it tends to pull people away from presenting the views, are actually trying to vindicate their rights because it is such an overwhelmingly costly endeavor.
Look, I think it's fact that Meta paid $22 million to President Trump to settle a lawsuit. Did Paramount pay? Yes, $16 million to President Trump as well. After Skydance settled, there was a merger approved within days as well. As a matter of fact, my team looked into the last time that a president sued one of these media companies. They had to go back to Teddy Roosevelt to find it. And do you know how much the settlement was for? 6 cents. Anyhow, there's a little trivia for you all as well. Look, as my time concludes, Mr. Davis, I don't know if you've ever been asked this. I can't find anywhere on the record where you've answered it. Who won the 2024 election in the United States of America?
Who won the 2024 election?
Yeah, for president.
Joe Biden was elected president.
In 2024?
Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Had 2020
That was
brain.
misinformation right there. So let's set the record straight. Who won the 2024 election?
I was in government censorship mode. Donald Trump won the 2024 election.
Who won the 2020 election?
Joe Biden was elected president in 2020.
I appreciate that very much. Right. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Well, since we're doing some presidential history, Mr. Davis, could you name the last president that was a prosecutor attempted to throw in jail for the rest of his life and impoverish his family? Has that ever happened?
Yeah, I recall Donald Trump being threatened.
Right, they're the
with
only one, not
prison.
even Teddy Roosevelt, since we're going back in time. I do want to ask you, Mr. Kimmelman, because just as a follow-up before, and I'm going to get to you just very quickly. The question was a president suing a news organization, and you said that the government taking that on would have a chilling effect. You're not arguing that an individual citizen, as President Trump, suing a media company for lies is a threat to the First Amendment, right?
No,
Okay,
I'm not.
thank you. Senator Blunt, Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my colleagues, yesterday there was a split screen on the news. Coverage of committee hearings and a shutdown clock. It was a tale of two realities. Republicans continue to call for hearings like it's business as usual, while Americans are literally living in the midst of a shutdown that jeopardizes their health, that jeopardizes their jobs, and the services that Americans rely on. So the issues before us are vitally important, but our number one priority in this moment should be reopening the government and restoring people's health care. So today I want to use my time to remind all of us what is at stake. We're in a pivotal moment. Energy costs are up, food prices are up, the rent has gone up for many, and millions of Americans in red states and blue states alike are on the brink of their healthcare costs doubling or losing it altogether. From small businesses to farmers to ranchers to moms and dads, at this very moment, Americans across our nation are making some very difficult decisions about how to make ends meet. We can fix this, but it requires negotiations. It requires us all to do our jobs and to find a path forward together. We can reopen the government. We can restore health care for the millions of Americans who are counting on us. But it requires urgency, and it requires trust, and it requires willingness to come to the table now. My Republican colleagues control the White House, the House, and the Senate. The ball is in your court. Let's make a deal. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I want to ask just a couple of questions before we close out here, because this is a topic of great interest to me. Mr. Davis, obviously this agenda that was at work cost you a lot, critical resources for your publication, your family. Given organizations like, I mean, there's so many of these that we just do not have time to go into them. I mean, the truth of the matter is what was uncovered was that, you know, we took their deposition. The CDC had approved words and phrases that social media companies could use in this secret portal that was established between the government and these social media companies conveyed this. And if people utter this phrase, I mean, this is sort of like, this is prior restraint, sort of like, this is what you will take down ahead of time. CISA was very much involved in this. You have an alphabet soup of agencies most people have never heard of that were weaponized against millions of voices in this country. We talk about President Trump a lot, but there's just a lot of just people who were online who had questions about forced masking of kids or the vaccine mandate, all those sorts of things, and they were throttled or taken down. So given what you know about organizations like the Election Integrity Project, that's another one, in collaboration with CISA and receive taxpayer funding, how are these NGOs still working currently to harm individuals from speaking their mind, particularly conservatives?
Yeah, it's a great question. The thing about these censorship tools and technologies and efforts is they're a little bit like injecting something into the body's bloodstream. They inject it in, it's in there, it's working its thing. And just because you pull the needle out doesn't mean the effects are gone. A lot of these organizations are still out there using technologies and tools that were deliberately funded and distributed by the federal government for the purpose of censoring people like me, people like Alex Berenson, people like my colleague Molly Hemingway. I don't know if we will ever actually be free of the effects of this censorship industrial complex that the previous administration created. I don't know if we will ever be free of the horrible effect that it created, the horrible dampening and abridgment of our speech that we were forced to endure secretly for years, and the extent of which we still don't fully know.
Mr. Berenson, I want to ask you, what is the most, in your kind of review of all this stuff after the fact, what's the single, I mean, it's hard to probably pick one, what's the most shocking thing that sort of you uncovered or found out about this whole thing, your experience?
That the White House